Welcome to Soul Connections, a podcast about enchanting relationships with the human, more than human, and divine. I'm Emily, an astrologer, mystic, and herbalist.
I'm Aryn, an astrologer, writer, and creator.
And I'm Dani, a musician, astro minister, and organizer. We're your hosts. Join us for illuminating conversations with radiant guests and Astro Church sermons that weave astrology, mythology, and tarot.
Journey with us as we make meaning out of mystery through archetypes, patterns, and storytelling.
Welcome to another episode of Soul Connections. I'm Dani.
I'm Aryn.
We have another interview segment today. This month, our guest is our co-host, Emily Hall. Emily is an astrologer, mystic, and herbalist living in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. She's a practitioner of astro-herbalism, ancestor reverence, and relational astrology, which is the practice of relating to the planets and stars as celestial, sentient ancestors. She's a writer and storyteller who shares musings about astrological cycles, plants, and mysticism in her newsletter, Flower Moon. Emily is a lifelong student with an insatiable curiosity who loves to read, listen to podcasts, and take courses about anything that fascinates her. In her free time, she loves to garden, go for long walks, moon and stargaze, host community gatherings, play cards with her family, and spend quality time with her husband and her two bunnies, Moon and Zinnia. Welcome, Emily.
Yay. Thank you, friends, for interviewing me.
Yeah. The first couple questions I have, what is your sun, moon, and rising?
Yes, I am a Taurus sun, and I am visually representing that for the interview today. A Gemini moon and a Leo rising.
Awesome. Great. Aryn, you want to take the interview away?
Absolutely. So the first question we have for you, Emily, is what lights you up?
Yeah, it was really fun to think about this question because there are so many things that light me up. And so when I was really thinking about how to condense it all, really it's my relationships. And specifically, I so much joy and love in my life is because of my relationship with community, my growing relationship with the divine, and of course, my relationship with the earth as well.
I love that. What about, can you explain more about what you mean by these relationships lighting you up? What specific relationships are you referring to, and how do they impact you?
Definitely. Yeah. Community for me, first and foremost, I think that's really rooted in like a longing for a sense of belonging. And it's taken me a really long time to find a community of people, of human beings that I feel like I really belong with my people. And I think I have been someone that has moved through a lot of different communities, a lot of different friend groups throughout my life. And I think that's really rooted in I am just always a person that is shape shifting, that is evolving. And as I've gotten closer and closer to the core essence of who I truly am, I've just been able to connect with people who like resonate with that version of myself that I am in this moment. And I do have a lot of wounding around not belonging, definitely some childhood experiences and being a child of divorced parents at a very young age, and then having both my parents get remarried and have children with my step parents, and Grew up very much feeling like the redheaded stepchild a lot of the time. And I also think there's much deeper wounds that's related more to my epigenetics and even like ancestral wounds, having ancestors who immigrated to the US, were displaced from their homelands, and then as most immigrant stories in the US, having to kind of give up your culture to assimilate for safety and survival. And I can only imagine what my ancestors felt like coming to a new country and that sense of not belonging and leaving their ancestral homeland. So for me, having a community of human beings is so important. And now at this point in my life, I feel like I finally found my people. Like you two are two of my people. And just like the people that we are all in relationship with in Milwaukee. I just really I just want to belong to a group of people, and I just want to have people that know me for who I truly am and accept me and love me, and so that I can accept and love them in return, and we can just support each other and love and uplift each other. And so that's why community is very important to me, and kind of what I mean by that. And then I would say my community ripples out to be my relationship with the divine and my relationship with the earth. I have a beautiful relationship with the divine. And to me, that is relationship with my ancestors, and relationship with any spirit guides that I may have that are guiding me, and also relationship with the planets. Like you shared in my intro, I really identify with being a relational astrologer. And so to me, that means I have relationships with these planets as ancestors, as divine celestial beings that show up for me in different ways. And I love that relationship. And it makes me feel like there's like a bigger purpose and bigger meaning. And then, of course, the earth. I absolutely love this planet. With every fiber of my being. I am rooting to be in deeper relationship with her every single day of my life. And that's really my journey as an herbalist and a gardener. But I just feel so grateful to be at home on this planet.
Thank you for sharing that, Emily. You're such a weaver in so many different ways, and I'm excited to look at your chart later and talk a little more about that. But talking, kind of separating this out, your relationship with with community and with the divine and with the earth, they all kind of connect to each other. So can we talk a little bit about your journey and how you got here? I know before you moved to Milwaukee, you were a community organizer in Chicago. So how did you get involved with community organizing, and how do you feel like those experiences shape that relationship with community that you're talking about?
Yeah. Thank you so much for asking. Yeah, I lived in Chicago for 6 years of my life from age 23 until I think 29. Yeah, until 29, which were just like the heart of my 20s, and such a time to be figuring out who I was as an adult. And the city of Chicago like shaped me. And it's been almost 3 years since I moved away from Chicago. And since then, I've actually realized that I have just as deep of roots in the city of Chicago ancestrally as I do in Milwaukee. Even though at times in Chicago, I felt like a transplant, or I felt like I was just I don't like some outsider. But now I'm like, no, that city like called to me from a young age. I have my paternal lineage is like all from Chicago. But that city, like that, I really, again, I'm an animist. That's like one of my spiritual beliefs, which means that I believe that every being has consciousness and is sentient, and that includes cities. Like cities themselves are alive. They have histories. They have personalities. And even my heart right now, thinking about the city of Chicago, I love that city with every part of me. That city shaped me into who I am today. And related to community organizing, a big part of Chicago's personality is that is a radical city with really radical history from like obviously racial justice. There is such a history around workers' rights. We have the Haymarket riots that happened in Chicago. Like, Chicago just has such a radical history for liberation of all people, and a really powerful working class city. That city was built by immigrants. That city was built by working class people. And that really like shows. And I really was very fortunate to be able to connect with that side of Chicago. And I think one, because like my paternal lineage ancestors who are from Chicago are like working class, blue collar people, who were like also union members. And so that like working class organizing, like that is in my blood. And even though I wasn't fully aware of that as a teenager, when I moved to Chicago, like I moved to Chicago in 2016, in the summer of 2016. And so what happened that fall? Well, we had the first, Trump administration. So I was living in Chicago when that was unfolding. And it just kind of aligned that when I graduated from undergrad as a young 22-year-old, that Bernie Sanders was running for president for the first time. And I became so like, he just really shattered a lot of like bubbles for me. I grew up in a very homogenous, kind of smaller town outside of Milwaukee in Wisconsin, in Mukwonago, Wisconsin. Everyone there really was no like racial diversity, ethnic diversity, very little, I should say. And you know again, like when I grew up as a high schooler, like being queer, like it was not really an accepted time to be queer, and I was so closeted, so deeply repressed in that nature, and I didn't know any fellow queer people. So when I got to move to the city of Chicago, like my whole world, like my whole bubble burst, and I just got to be in this beautiful diverse city and just be in relationship with people from so many different backgrounds, from so many different beliefs. And I just, as a young person, and when you look at my chart, I feel like it's really prevalent in my chart, like just always like been someone that really like felt called to make some type of change or like to stand up for something bigger than myself. Um, and so I will say I credit Bernie for really kind of awakening me politically the first time and like learning about universal health care. Like he was the first person when I was 22 that I was like, yeah, fuck these billionaires, like fuck wealth inequality. Like we should not be having this. Like that's not how a society should be set up. And so I just had a couple years of just really being politically awakened. And then in 2018 is when I joined my first political organization. And I really wanted to take just kind of my beliefs and start to actually like put them into action. Like I just really felt like, all right, my worldview has completely shifted. I was working at a healthcare nonprofit that supported folks in the disability community. So I just was like befriending disabled folks. My best friend was a young woman who uses a power wheelchair. We worked together. Shout out Sawson, still love her so much. She lives out in LA now. But I just was having like, I was learning about ableism and seeing the city through her eyes and how inaccessible and ableist like the culture is. The city is physically inaccessible, like so much of the time. And so all of this just kind of added up to me just wanting to take action. And so I decided to join an organization, and the organization I joined was the Democratic Socialists of America, again, because of Bernie Sanders. And really because of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I remember her winning her race in 2018 and upsetting Joe Crowley. And I was like, all right, this DSA has like something's happening with this DSA organization. Like, let me check them out. So I joined them in 2018. And healthcare has always been a huge part of my life. It's what I work in professionally. It's what I got my degree in college in. And so I joined their healthcare working group and I started organizing for their citywide campaign for Medicare for All.
Well, thank you for sharing some of that. How do you feel like, so you did a lot of that in Chicago and organizing for Medicare for All. Eventually you decided to move to Milwaukee though. Can you tell me, has your relationship changed at all with community since you moved to Milwaukee?
Yeah, it has actually completely changed. I feel like the biggest shift, well, one, I organized for 4 years in Chicago. And I was organizing from 2018 through 2022, right up until I moved. And that was just, right smack dab in the middle of that was COVID, the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, the murder of George Floyd, and then all of the uprisings for the movement for Black Lives and the movement to defund the police. And I was organizing through all of that. And my community in Chicago during those 4 years, like pretty much all of the friends that I had, I either knew directly through the Democratic Socialists of America. They were either like people I organized with directly, or through that network, 1 degree of separation, people that I met that were friends with my fellow organizers. And then also through my work with the healthcare nonprofit. I had a few friends through that. So my community, it's actually interesting to think about it. Uh, all these relationships were political in nature. At least that's how they started. Like, we shared political beliefs, we shared political values, we were organizing for campaigns together. And it was such a beautiful way to relate to people and to come together and feel like we have this beautiful vision of this more just and equitable and loving world. And like, we are willing to fight for it. And that is what we are doing together. And we also had like a lot of fun. Like, I had a lot of friends where, like, yeah, we'd be organizing together, we'd be going to protests, or we'd be on Zoom calls, like planning around our campaigns. But we also understood that, like, just being together and having fun was really important. We would all celebrate our birthdays together. We would during the like pandemic years, we would organize like park hangouts at parks all throughout the city of Chicago. And I have so many beautiful memories of just like biking through the city in 2020 and 2021 to meet up with friends at a park. And we really understood that like community is like about trust and is about relationships, and like wanting to show up for your comrades. And so my biggest shift, I did ultimately get burnt out, as a lot of young organizers do. I don't think there's a really great culture of like boundaries, and like radical self-care, and understanding that like if you want to be a movement organizer, like forever, that like you have to take really good care of your body. You have to take really good care of your mental health. And that was just not something I was aware of. That was not something I was taught. That's not something that was really talked about when I was organizing. And so I got incredibly burnt out. I just am someone that has always struggled that like I will take on too much and take on too much responsibility, feel like that I alone can change the world, and that like by taking on all of this responsibility that I can do it, that it's in service of something bigger, that it's in service of this beautiful world that I envision living in, or I envision my descendants living in. But ultimately it just wasn't healthy. And so I burnt out. And so that forced me to step back from organizing. Um, and as I was recovering from burnout, I moved to Milwaukee. And so my husband and I, who was my boyfriend at the time, moved to Milwaukee, and that was like a coming home for me because my maternal lineage, my mom's side of the family, is all from Milwaukee. And so I grew up in Mukwonago, which is about 25 miles west of Milwaukee. And so this was like my coming home, so that I could be closer to my mom, I could be closer to my grandparents, and I could be closer to my family. And when I first moved to Milwaukee, one, it was really hard because I just up and left my entire community in Chicago. Um, and I just had to like start over from scratch. And I had family relationships and I spent a lot of time with my family, but like building trust and making new friendships as an adult, it's hard. I just want to acknowledge if anyone's out there, you move somewhere new or you're just an adult that's like trying to find friends and find your people, like it's hard. You really have to be willing to put yourself out there. And I will say, like, it's also like a superpower that I have that I'm willing to do that. I'm willing to be vulnerable. I'm willing to ask random people that I meet out for coffee and like, hey, let's talk, like, and see if there's something we can connect over. So I think the biggest shift for me moving to Milwaukee is one, I did join the Democratic Socialists of America, DSA, for a couple months, um, like maybe 3 months when I first moved here, because I was like, that's the only way I knew how to meet people was through political organizations. Um, and I did that for 3 months and I joined one of their working groups and I fell into my exact same burnout patterns. I started taking on all of this responsibility. Um, and Milwaukee is a significantly smaller city than Chicago, and there are significantly less people in political organizations because there's just a less of a population. And so I was kind of jumping into leadership roles as I do. I do feel like I very much kind of am drawn to and naturally fill leadership roles. I'm just comfortable in those roles, and I'm willing to do the work. But after 3 months of that, it was also like literally like heading right to my exact Saturn return. Um, and I was like, full stop. I was like, there is a specific situation that I spoke my truth in a meeting, and I was like, I think we are moving like very urgently ahead with this campaign. I don't think there's actually been enough like strategy or like community conversations had around like the outcome of this campaign. And I just like laid it all bare in a meeting, and there were just crickets. And I was like, okay, this is not for me. And so I left. Um, and then I had to figure out how to find relationships that weren't through political organizations. And um, fortunately, my relationship with astrology allowed me to do that. But now I will say my biggest shift is I will say I share a lot of like political values with my friends that I have now and the people that I'm in community with. But politics is not like the core of what brought us together. I think I've really shifted of like the people that I'm in relationship and with now and in community. We share a lot of love and a lot of joy, and we like to be vulnerable together, and we like to show up for each other. And my community today, mostly women, mostly queer people. And we just connect over those identities, and we just connect over a lot of my friends are witches, a lot of my friends are artists and creatives. And it's been really nice to connect with people over things outside of politics, and I've gotten like a lot better at like kind of unlearning my own dogma and not letting my own strong political beliefs hinder me from building community with people.
Thank you for sharing all that. It's a really interesting concept that I resonated with a lot of what you were saying, especially the sort of habitual put yourself in the same pattern kind of thing. And also I was thinking, I was like, oh, like Emily's Leo rising, Sun and Taurus in the 10th house. Like, of course, leadership roles are just like so appealing to you, and you like naturally gravitate towards that. And so I'm curious to hear more about your journey as an astrologer, What led you to become an astrologer, and how does astrology influence your relationship with the divine and also community?
Yeah. Oh, yes, they all weave together, don't they? Thank you for asking. Okay, one I will say, when I was still in Chicago, one of my comrades that I was organizing with in DSA, their name is Kelly. Shout out Kelly. And their astrology practice is Moon Knitter. So I'll make sure to give a shout out and link Moon Knitter in the notes. Kelly was a close comrade of mine, and we had this group chat, and she was like, "Hey, everybody, I'm launching an astrology practice." And I was like, fuck yeah, Kelly, that's awesome. I was like, I want to get an astrology reading. And so Kelly was my first astrologer. So again, it's funny, right? Like this community organizing that I did is actually what led me to astrology. Funny how everything kind of, how the universe works in that way, or the divine works that way. So I probably got like 2 or 3 astrology readings with Kelly throughout like 2021, 2022. And I was like, Kelly, I really like this. Like, cause I was trying to figure out who I was. Like when I was an organizer, I was just doing. I did not have a journaling practice. I like was recently out of a pretty abusive relationship that I was still like healing from. And like anyone who's been in an abusive situation, like to kind of come back to yourself after that is a really long and treacherous and winding journey to like reclaim all the parts of yourself. And astrology allowed me to do that. Astrology was like, really helped me understand who I was through the lens of the natal chart and through these archetypes. And it just like, oh, it was like every time I go back to my natal chart, I've been studying, I've been like into astrology. Like 2021 was the year that I started really getting into it. So it's been almost 4 years now. I go back to my chart over and over again and I find new layers of self. And so it just was such a beautiful accompaniment of just trying to figure out who I was as like a late 20 something in my Saturn return, which I feel like is such a big figuring out who you are at this next chapter of your life. And I remember the last reading I got with Kelly, I was like, I want to study this. Like I want to go deeper. Like I want to expand my knowledge. And she sent me this beautiful email with all of these astrologers, and it was like Diana Rose Harper and Kira Taborn, and I just dove in. Like I was like on social media following all of them. I came across Kira Taborn's astrology podcast, which is called The Astrology Show. And I listened to like all of the episodes. And then maybe like 6 to 9 months into kind of just like self study and just like finding everything I could on social media, listening to all, and then I found Chris Brennan's The Astrology Podcast, of course, as well. And then Kelly was actually the one, because she knew I was really interested in it. She's actually the one that sent me the first astrology course that I ever took. My like first astrology teacher is Rowan Oliver. They are an amazing astrologer based in the Pacific Northwest. And in 2022, they were hosting like a 12-week, they called it like astrology summer school. And it was introduction to traditional Hellenistic astrology. And Kelly forwarded to me and was like, hey, I know you're getting into this. You might be interested in this. And I was like, yes, sign me up. So I signed up for that course, and that was like taking all of this self-study and really like gave it a foundation. Like that 12-week, like it was an in-depth look at like the Hellenistic. And the thing is, it was like the perfect amount for me because there are some astrologers like Chris Brennan that do like year-long courses. And then we have like Astrology University, and there's definitely more like academic timeline ways that you could follow for astrology. That doesn't work for me. I need to flit around. But a 12-week course was perfect. I was like, yes, give me the foundation, give me the bones, let's build the walls, and then I can do my own decorating from there and like follow what fascinates me from there. So shout out Kelly Moon Knitter, shout out Rowan Oliver. They really led me there. And ultimately, all of the people, like all of the astrologers that I was really called to, a lot of them, one, were like millennials and like, you know, kind of, I would say like next gen astrologers. And then, of course, amazing teachers like Demetra George and Chris Brennan and Shani Nicholas. But I loved learning from people who were more similar in age to me because I just really loved their more contemporary perspective on astrology. And that's when I learned like people were talking about these planets like they were living beings because they are. And I would listen to these podcasts and Kira would talk about building a moon altar or a Venus altar and, you know, doing a Venus ritual. And I was like, wow, I want to do that. And so astrology was totally like a big gateway of mine into rekindling my relationship with the divine, and doing it through these beautiful celestial ancestors. And when I talk about the planets as ancestors, I just want to give credit to Ari Felix, who is one of my like, they are one of my all-time favorite astrology teachers. I am absolutely obsessed with their work. And they did a talk several years ago on the planets as ancestors. And so they really introduced me to the framework of these are our celestial ancestors. Like they are here to guide us, they have divine wisdom to share. And it was just kind of learning from all these mystical astrologers. And I was like, of course, like I can relate to these. They're not just inanimate space, rock, and gas. They are celestial divine intelligences. And so that's kind of like how I came into astrology and how it really led to like me having a deeper relationship with like the divine overall.
Yeah, it seems like a big theme is ancestors. And I feel like even the way that you were talking about astrology, you were referring to teachers as like in association with the legacies that they inherit or that they work within. And so I'd love to hear more about just your relationship with ancestor reverence. You mentioned it a little bit when you were talking about your connections to Chicago and Milwaukee, but like what does that practice look like? Are there memorable experiences that you've had that you'd like to share to illustrate your relationship with ancestral reverence?
Yeah. Ooh, I love talking about my ancestors. And I think one thing for me, and maybe it's like the Taurus nature of me, is I really feel like a deep calling to like root myself. One, root myself in community, and two, root myself in place and in time. And it's almost like all of these things that light me up: community, the earth, the divine. It's like it's rooting me in the present moment. And it's like, my ancestors, their stories, their experiences, their bodies, like their journeys, like literally feed my roots. Like my body came from their bodies. And then also, like, I am space dust and star, right? Like, I also, like, my soul, that soul aspect of myself comes from the stars. And my body and my ancestors' bodies came of the earth. So I really do believe, I feel like rootedness is kind of just like a lens or like a feeling that I have in how I approach my life. Because I know what it feels like to feel untethered. And rooting and like feeling grounded and feeling rooted is like when I feel the most alive and present. And so building a relationship with my ancestors is like one of the practices that like roots me in my human body and my human story of like, who am I as a human being and who are the human beings that I came from. um I am very fortunate to have a beautiful relationship with my maternal living family, my mom, my grandma, my great aunts, my cousins, like my maternal side of the family. We are just like such a close knit family. And so I get to have, and not everyone has that. And I want to acknowledge that. And so I've gotten a lot of stories about my ancestors through my living family members. And I will say, kind of the ancestor relationship that started it all was my relationship with my great grandpa Rupert, who is truly my guardian angel. We did kind of cross paths on this earthly plane for a very brief amount of time. I was born in April of 1993, and he passed away in July of 1993. I was his very first great grandchild. I come from a lineage of oldest daughters. That like my mom is an oldest daughter, my grandma is an oldest daughter, I am an oldest daughter, so I got to be his first great grandchild, and he got to hold me in his arms and spend a little bit of time together before he passed and crossed over. So even though that we spent such a short amount of time and I don't have any human memories of him, like my childhood is colored with memories of him. I wrote about this in my newsletter because it's just like, and I have chills like all over my body because it's just such a beautiful, I think, example and story of how our ancestors are always with us. They are always with us, and they want us to know that. And they want us to know that they love and guide us and protect us and support us every day. And that like our missions and the work that and the lives that we live here on earth is like really important to them. And they want to support that. And so when I was a little girl, my grandma, her sisters, my great aunts, and my mom would talk about Grandpa Rupert as if he were alive. It was always like, Grandpa Rupert's playing tricks on us. Like he was just like this trickstery energy. And so I have like lots of stories. And so that was just part of how I grew up. And I didn't really think much of it. I wasn't like, I believed I was like, it was just kind of normal. It was just normal. It wasn't anything like super special. It was just, oh, Grandpa Rupert's playing tricks on us. That's just what he does because he is such like a trickstery, jokester energy. But it was the same year that astrology came into my life, which was 2021. I also just like really opened spiritually. And I totally believe like my grandpa Rupert, my great grandma, his wife, who I'm named after, her name is Emily Willing. I feel like my ancestors, probably my great aunt Marianne, who also passed away when I was a teenager. I feel like they all orchestrated this to happen because they're like, we want Emily to like talk with us. Like we want her to know that we're here. So my mom just like called me one day and was like, I just read this book and you have to read it. So the next time I saw my mom, she gave me the book, and I talk about this book all the time because especially when people are like just beginning to build relationships with ancestors, or spirit guides or the divine, I feel like it's such an I loved the book. I think it's accessible. I just think I love personal stories and narratives. So it was called Signs, Secret Language of the Universe. And it's written by a psychic medium, Laura Lynn Jackson, and she talks about how she calls them our teams of light, which can be made up of guides and ancestors, and how they communicate with us through signs. And at the end of the book, she encourages her readers to begin communicating with their teams of light through signs and through requesting signs. And when I read that, I was like, oh, yeah, duh. Like, of course I can do that. Like, instantly, I was like, Grandpa Rupert, and I knew like exactly what my sign was going to be. My family, my grandma all over her house has cardinals. My great aunts have cardinals all over their house. Like we've always associated cardinals with my great grandparents. And so it was like late 2021. I started asking for cardinals, and like literally it was like the floodgates opened and I was receiving cardinal after cardinal after cardinal, and it just opened so much for me, and it was really like affirmation and just encouraged me to keep going and keep building this relationship. um and I can talk about this for so long. There's more to the story. So and it weaves into how I got into Milwaukee. But any thoughts so far before I kind of get deeper into the story with Grandpa Rupert?
Well, I just think it's you were kind of set up, it sounds like early on to be open to some of this stuff, which is just really cool if you ask me. And I just think it's really special, like asking for that and then just like getting just a floodgate of affirmations of what you asked for, Um, so I want to hear more about that. I want to hear more about like what your actual experiences have been, with since 2021. You had astrology come into your life, you're going through your Saturn's return, like you're burnt out from political organizing, your mom sends you this book, and your mom is a living ancestor, obviously, too, So what happened after that?
Yeah, and it's now that I'm out of my Saturn return, it's like really fun to like look back and be like, wow, this was such a transformational time. And I definitely am like, telling it in like glowing ways because it really was like deepening my relationship with the divine and really opening what I do consider myself like a mystic because I have this deep relationship with the divine and I have all these experiences that affirm and prove that relationship to me. And I also just want to acknowledge that just because I'm giving the highlights and the exciting parts, that this was also coupled with like deep healing from trauma and like deep soul excavation. Like shadow work was a part of this journey and like grappling with trauma that I had experienced as a child and that I experienced as a young adult in an abusive relationship. And so, I just want to acknowledge that while I'm really sharing like the parts that light me up, there also was like a lot of like dark nights of the soul and a lot of like trauma healing that was going on simultaneously. And I think I really do think my ancestors were like supporting me going through that work. And if I didn't have this relationship with them that was opening up at the same time, it was almost like I had this like divine opening, like this huge, almost like third eye crown chakra opening while I was deep in the underworld, like while I was so deep in the underworld. Um, and it was like it's what gave me the like I saw the light at the end of the tunnel, even if it was maybe years down the road, but it was like still there. So I just wanted to give that context.
Well,
um
usually in any time of expansion, that is what happens. Whenever we are expanding, it is uncomfortable. It's like the whole concept of the North Node of like, we're, hungry for something. And when we are expanding, a lot of times we're breaking open, and burnout is no joke. You do talk about burnout, you have mentioned it, and we're, kind of passively mentioning it because obviously we want to talk about what lights you up, but like burnout is a very serious it's a physical experience. It's an illness, And so like you physically, when you're going through something like that, a lot of times when we physically are experiencing something really big, it, it does allow us, it is as if we are breaking, and it kind of maybe opens us up a little bit more to some of the spiritual messages and needing more of spirituality and stuff to help us through very challenging times,
Yeah. Oh, that was so beautifully put. I 100% agree. Like, and I think that's like a deep Saturn return experience is like a deep breaking open. Um, and that's totally what it was. It was like a breaking open. And um, I've had a lot of insights about my chart. And when we get to that point, like, I have a huge capacity for like darkness and suffering. And I have suffered a lot in my life. And I think my ancestors have suffered even more. And that like gets passed on in my epigenetics. And I'm also like, I am the cycle breaker. Like, I have been one, I think that's part of the Pluto and Scorpio generation. I think Pluto and Scorpio, it's like you either succumb to Pluto and Scorpio or you like rise with Pluto and Scorpio out of the depths and you're like, I'm breaking these cycles. Or you could be one that unfortunately it's just too strong and it's too hard. And there's no shame in that, right? Like Pluto and Scorpio is like, we are the generation that's here to do this like really deep psychological, emotional, physical like trauma healing work, unfortunately. but there's also beauty in it for me, at least. I've been able to like find the beauty in it. Um,
That's why everyone
so
calls millennials whiny, by the way. We're not whiny. We're literally carrying in our bodies the entire ancestral line of trauma that we're supposed to somehow process. Like, leave us
yes.
alone.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yes, Dani. Yes. Shout out to all the Pluto and Scorpio folks out there. We are doing it. I do remember when I was really opening, connecting with my ancestors, connecting with astrology, I was so deep on TikTok. And TikTok is a lot of place where I got a lot of my information. And I would get a lot of readings from tarot readers and like intuitive readings that would just show up on my For You page. And they would just like smack me in the face. And I'd be like, this is for me. But I do remember seeing a lot about like ancestral curses and a lot of like women and queer people, and especially women of color on TikTok being like, why do I have to be the one to heal these ancestral curses? What do you mean I have been the chosen one? And so that's kind of how I feel. But I also feel like I have the capacity for it. Or I've built the capacity for it. So 2021, I was really in the depths. I was in the depths of like, so late 2021, early 2022, I physically had to give up organizing. And it really was kind of like I've had a few moments in my life where it's just like I get this sudden clarity and the thought sounds like my own voice. That's kind of how spirit shows up for me, is like I'll think something and to me it sounds like my own voice, but it was like that was not me. That was like divine, like that was ancestral, that was divine. And I'm at times I'm able to like parse out what's my own thoughts and what is like our divine thoughts. And it was just one of those thoughts. And I don't want to open this can of worms, but a big reason for my burnout was there is an entire year of my life that I was planning on running for city council in Chicago. And that is a big driver of my burnout and why I was like, just felt so compelled to do all the things, and running for city council just felt like it would be the one way that I could prove that I was like a good person, that I don't know, there was a lot of wounding tied up in that. But there was one night I just had a very exhausting day. There was a lot of abuse and harassment that was happening within the DSA. There was a lot of infighting, which is something that kind of happens in these political spaces. People will fight with each other over different like political ideologies. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people in radical leftist spaces that have never, and unfortunately, a lot of men in these spaces that have never like done the internal reflection of like, how do they perpetuate patriarchy? How do they perpetuate sexism and misogyny? And like, they just like, there's a lot of people in these spaces that haven't thought about that, or like worked to not harm people that they're organizing with. And so it was just like a perfect storm of all of this. And that's what led me to burn out. Because I was also providing a lot of emotional support. Like my friends, like mostly like non-binary folks, women of color, like queer folks, women, like they were the ones that were, of course, facing the most abuse and harassment, because that's what happens in this patriarchal white supremacist society. And then I was like really being there to like show up like emotionally for them. And it just like, it was a lot. I could not, like, I reached my breaking point and I was like emotionally burnt out, mentally burnt out, and physically burnt out. And just one night, it was just like an exhaustive evening of meetings talking about all this stuff that was happening. And then it was just like divine clarity. And it was like, you don't have to run. And it was like, it was just like this weight lifted off my shoulders. And I was like, yeah, I don't have to run for alderman. Like that just, and that set everything in motion for me to like start to realize like, oh shit, I'm really burnt out. Why have I taken on all of this responsibility? Why do I feel like I have to carry the weight of the world on my shoulders? And it just like, so I really feel like that message came from my ancestors in some way. And so it kind of just sent me on this journey. And then that was maybe in like September or October. And then fast forward like almost 6 months later, that March of 2022, I had finally left community organizing. I had stepped back from everything. And I just like felt like I felt so lost. I was like, being an organizer was my entire identity. Like I literally had like an identity crisis. I was like, if I am not an organizer, who am I? I had no idea. Um, and so I felt so stagnant and lost. And I left all these organizing spaces and I just felt like the community that I had was rooted in those political spaces. And I was taking space away from that. I just felt like I didn't really have anybody. And I was really trying to figure out who I was. And this was the same time that astrology was really coming in, and my relationship with my ancestors were really coming in to like pick me back up and help me figure out like who I was and like what this next phase of my life would be. Um, and so I love to bike. Bike riding is like something that lights me up for sure. And I spent a lot of time during the pandemic riding my bike up and down Lake Michigan in Chicago. And I was just really, it was like a beautiful spring day. It was like a 70-degree early March day. And I biked to the lake and I would just like felt really compelled to like sit at the base of this tree and like look out at the lake. And I had just started like getting into meditation a little bit. And I just really felt called to like ground and meditate. And I was like, something needs to change. Like I didn't have a purpose. I was so confused. And I was like, I feel so stuck. And Chicago is not lighting me up in the way that it used to. And during that meditation, I like Wisconsin and specifically Milwaukee like kept coming to me. Um and I was like for most of my 20s vehemently opposed to moving back to Wisconsin. Like when I was 18, I got away from Wisconsin. I didn't want to go back. I had wanted to get away from there for so long. And I just like I felt like a softening. And this was during Pisces season. So that's just kind of how Pisces season feels in my body, is like a thawing, a softening, a melting. And I just like, I felt like I was like, oh, Wisconsin. Like I don't feel so much like opposition against this as I used to. Like I used to just be a hard no. And now I'm like, okay, maybe there's something here. Um, Immediately when I got out of that meditation, I looked at my phone and my best friend Liz texted me and said, "Hey, I'm going to Milwaukee this weekend. Do you have any recommendations?" And I was like, what? So to me, that's a sign. That was like confirmation. And so I biked home and I thought about what it would be like to live in Milwaukee. And everything in my body was just like, yes, like this is what we're doing. We're moving to Milwaukee. And when I make a decision, like I mean, I have a lot of Aries in my chart. I like when my mind is made, it's happening. So I got home and I called Will, my husband, who was my boyfriend at the time. And I was like, hey, I think I want to move to Milwaukee. And he was like, okay. Um, for a couple years, he'd kind of been like planting some seeds. That's usually what he does. He knows I need to come to things like on my own. But he would always be like, one day when we have land in Wisconsin. And he'd been saying that for like a year. But to me, it was like, yeah, way far down the road, way far down the road. And so I got the yes from him. And I was like, that's all I needed. I just needed his consent because I kind of knew. I was like, he's going to be down to move to Milwaukee because he's just not really a big city person. Anyways, I then messaged my boss because I realized I was like, okay, to move to Milwaukee, like I will need to have a job. Like that's like the biggest, like I need to have like a stable job. And I remembered that the position that I had, there's one of us in each state. And my coworker who had the position in Wisconsin was recently promoted like maybe a few weeks earlier. So the position was vacant and I knew they were interviewing for it. So I messaged my boss immediately and I was like, hey, is the Wisconsin position open? I want to move to Milwaukee. And she was like, well, we just gave the offer to someone. And she's like, they get like a 48-hour window to like accept the job. And it had already been a full day and they had not heard anything. And she was like, I have a gut feeling this person is just not going to get back to us. She's like, give me a day. Like, I'll let you know tomorrow after this like window closes. So she messaged me the next morning and she was like, are you serious about moving to Milwaukee? And I was like, yes. And then she went into a meeting and an hour later she messaged me and she was like, the job is yours. This all happened in like less than 24 hours, like literally less than 24 hours. It was like, and that's how I feel like I know, like when the signs align and something happens so quickly and easily, that it's like divinely orchestrated in some way, that it's like, ooh, this is the path that like, I just like jumped timelines almost. It was like a timeline collapsed and I jumped to the next one and it all like worked out. And then just to add even more to this, because it gets even wilder. So Will and I move to Milwaukee in July. So July of 2022. And we moved to the neighborhood River West, which is where we live today. And love this neighborhood. I literally have never felt so rooted in my entire life. We signed our lease. And granted, when this happened, I knew that my mom's side of the family was from Milwaukee, but I didn't like, I just knew they were from the city of Milwaukee. I didn't know anything deeper or more detailed than that. We sign a lease on Booth Street and we move into our apartment. And maybe like a week or so after we move in, my grandma goes, Emily, Booth Street sounds really familiar. She's like, I think your great grandma, which was her mom, I think her childhood home was on Booth Street. And I was like, what? So she started like asking some family members and found out that yes, my great grandma, who I'm named after, by the way, lived on Booth Street. And so I was like, I need to do this research. Like, I need to find out. And so I got super deep into ancestry and genealogy research. And I went to the library downtown, and this librarian helped me like do all of this. And this is like my Polish lineage, my Slavic lineage. That's my direct mother line goes straight to Poland. I found out that my ancestors, my great great grandparents, they owned two houses on Booth Street in the neighborhood River West. They owned a house in 1920 at Booth and Chambers, and then in 1930 they owned a house at Booth and Keefe. And I literally live on the same street, in the same neighborhood as they did. And so it was my great great grandparents and then my great 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 grandparents. They were the ones that immigrated here from Poland in the late 1800s and early 1900s. And there was one time that I was at Boswell Books, like as I was doing this research. And this was another sign. And I just overheard these two people talking in the bookstore. And one of them goes, did you know that River West used to be called Polish Hill? And I was just like, I just overheard this. And I was like, huh, that makes sense. Cause like this community, this neighborhood was like a ton of Polish immigrants had settled here. And my ancestors were those people. And so I literally live in the same neighborhood that my Polish ancestors did 100 years ago. It's the neighborhood that my great grandmother grew up in, spent the first 18 years of her life in this neighborhood.
Is Emily, right? The one that you're named after?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Emily Willing. Willing is her married name, but Puchkowski is her Polish maiden name. So
also
this is
funny that you're married to Will. I'm sorry.
I know. I know. So I've been deep into the ancestry research, and I will say, like, my ancestors literally guided me home. Like, no ifs, ands, or buts about it. They literally orchestrated all of this and like supported me and literally called me home. And I do want to acknowledge that like this is not my ancestral homeland at all, right? Like this is Potawatomi ancestral homeland that I live on today. Um, and a big part of my practice, and something that I do strive to commit to doing is, honoring my own ancestry and honoring the ancestry of the land. And I do have a lot more learning to do about the native history of the land that I live on. But I do know that this is Potawatomi territory. And so this is truly their ancestral homelands. And at the same time, the level of rootedness that I feel here, like it's almost like a fraction of like a feeling of what it must be like for someone to live on their ancestral homelands where their ancestors lived there for thousands upon thousands of years. I have like a small fraction of that, because I literally live in the neighborhood that my ancestors lived on. They went to school here, they like went to church here, like all of it. And it's a beautiful feeling. And I feel the most rooted that I've ever felt. And like, I just think that connection to land and ancestry, um, can be like such a grounding force. And so that is my long, winding journey of my ancestors guiding me back home.
And you do, like, you have your ancestral book club now that you're doing. You still are on this journey. This is a big part of your practice. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Something that is interesting to me that you said earlier on, and we kind of got off on a tangent, which is great. I love that about conversation, but I really liked how you framed, I am both like my body on this earth comes from these bodies that were on this earth, and I'm made of stardust, like we're all made of, stardust, like Uranus and Gaia, the great love story between earth and sky, right? Um, so this ancestor practice obviously has a relationship with both things. Um, you also talked about your experience when you decided to move to Chicago, or to Milwaukee in Chicago, being with Lake Michigan, sitting with the tree, your connection to cardinals. So I know, the last relational thing we have to kind of talk about is your relationship to the earth. So you want to talk a little bit more about that and what led you to herbalism?
Yeah, absolutely. I really do feel like astrology is what led me back to the earth. Because astrology is a study of the planets, and frankly, what is the most important planet to us as humans? The earth. And everything in astrology is from a geocentric point of view, where Earth is at the center of the universe. Even though astronomically we know that that's not factual, there's like a spiritual level of like Earth being at the center. And I think studying astrology really led me to a lot of teachers that are like folk magic practitioners. Like Amaya Rourke is one of my most beloved and cherished teachers, and she is an animist. She is a folk magic practitioner. She is a witch, and she is just like a powerful teacher. Um, and I just kept getting connected to these astrologers who also had like so much like their spiritual practices were so much more enriched, like then it wasn't just astrology, right? Like, and I kept getting introduced to, whether through podcasts or like, I'm always learning. I said in my bio, I'm a forever student. Like I'm constantly learning. And I love learning from, like, when I find those teachers that I really revere, I like to see who they're in relationship with, because I'm like, I know I'm going to connect with those people. And my astrological studies kept veering me to the astro-herbal teachers, which is like the bridge between the astrology community and the herbalism community. Then there's those of us that are the bridges, which is bridging astrology and herbalism. Because actually, when we go back in history, just even a few hundred years, right before we had like modern medicine, um, even like Hippocrates, the father of modern medicine, where we get the Hippocratic Oath from, like he was an herbalist. And at that time, herbalists also had relationships with the planets. And every plant, they knew that every plant was ruled by a specific planet. And there was this astro-herbal connection that kind of got lost because of the Age of Enlightenment, and kind of this blossoming and birth of Western medicine. But I just kept getting guided towards these astro-herbal teachers. And so again, I just want to name like my teachers in this lineage. One is Sarah Corbett. And Sarah Corbett is an astrologer and a clinical herbalist, and her business and her school is called Rowan and Sage. And then my other beloved teacher is Adriana Ayales. And I am just like, she is such a mystical, divine, amazing human. Her business is Anima Mundi Herbals. And she's another clinical herbalist and astrologer. And in 2023, it was like end of 2023, I enrolled in 2 astro-herbal courses. I took the online Cosmic Herbalism course with Adriana Ayales, where she has like 7 lectures, and each is focused on a planet and the plants that are in relationship and connected to that planet, that planet. And then I also took a year-long, it's called Seasonal Herb Craft, which was a year-long astral herbal course with Sarah Corbett through Rowan and Sage. And that was all about rooting into the seasons. She'd do a lecture on each of the zodiac signs, and she'd talk about the plants related to that season. So it was almost like astrology led me back home to the earth. And after a few months of doing these astro herbal courses, I was just like, I need to go all the way. Like, I just need to know, like, for me, herbalism is a huge full circle moment. When I was in high school, I was fully intending on becoming a doctor. That was my plan. I applied to all these colleges as a biology major, and I started as a biology major at the University of Illinois. And then after freshman year, I just like the hard sciences were not for me. College level academics, my undiagnosed ADHD, like it was really rough. I could not do that level of rigor of STEM. It's just that's not what I'm here to do. But it led me to find community health, which is really public health. So it's funny that my major, what I graduated with was community health, which like tracks with like my story. So now it's like I'm coming full circle, because like my dream and my plan is to be a community herbalist. That's like what I'm training to do right now. And I am like officially like I got my little blazer on. I'm putting on the label of herbalist. I will say I'm not like, I'm practicing for myself. I will say I am practicing, but just for myself. And I'm working towards being able to launch. And once I finish, I'm now in a 2-year online program through the Herbal Academy. My intention is to launch a business in a couple years. That will be like a magical herbal, astro-herbal, mystical business of some kind. But really, like, herbalism is just everything to me, because it's rooting me back into my relationship with the earth. And just as I built these relationships with the planets as our celestial ancestors, now, and I forget the name of the person who coined this, but they are an herbalist and a writer. And they wrote a beautiful book. And I'll have to recall it, and I want to give them credit, but they coined the word plant cesters. And so now I'm building relationships with the plant cesters, and like the plants literally are also our ancestors, because plants have been on earth for way longer than humans ever have. So they are our ancestors. And so herbalism is a full circle moment for me. It's like I've come all the way back around, or like through, I'm in the labyrinth, in the spiral. But now I get to weave all of these things together. And for me, like, I just want to care for people. I've worked in healthcare my entire career. I'm very disillusioned by our capitalist healthcare, like a profit-driven healthcare system. That ain't it. Like, and I really do believe that, yes, we have Western medicine here to support us. My husband is a type 1 diabetic. He would not be alive if it wasn't for Western medicine. And I think there's a beautiful accompaniment of how herbal medicine and plants can really nourish our bodies and nourish us and support us in accompaniment with Western medicine. And for me, it's a deeply mystical relationship too, because I'm like, now the earth is my teacher. Now these plants are becoming my teachers. And like, I have human teachers and I have like actual plant teachers, and the earth is becoming my teacher. And I'm learning to build a relationship. And I just feel like where I'm at now in my life, like I just feel so at home. I feel so at home in my body. I feel so at home in my human community. I feel so at home in Milwaukee and River West. And I feel so at home on this earth. And it's like, I'm like, I want to cry about it because I'm that's all my younger self ever wanted. And now I get to experience that. And it's like, this entire journey that I've been on, which like a lot of the time it didn't feel like any of this wove together. And it's like now at like 31, almost 32 years old, I'm like, oh, but it does all relate. It does all connect. And it was all leading me to where I am now, which is this like beautiful, abundant, like joyful existence that it's also an existence where I get to be very present and just savor and be content and present in my present life instead of striving and wishing I was somewhere else far off in the future.
Thank you for sharing that, Emily. It really does weave together super beautifully, and I think is a really good case study, maybe, for people who are like, how does like synchronicity work? How does, you know what I mean? All that, like you're talking about that book, Signs, Messages from the Universe, you know, like it's your journey, your story kind of shows how some of that synchronistic, like universe magic works when you kind of open yourself up to it. So it's really fun to hear this story. I've heard pieces of this story, but it's really fun to hear it all like through in a line. Can we look at your chart?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because I have so many thoughts. Things are lighting up as you're talking about your chart, which, to be fair, we have seen Emily's chart before. So we might already have ideas that we want to talk about, I think.
The context and the stories really make it succinct, though.
Yeah,
Even though we've
totally.
looked at the chart, it's like what you said is that things activate as we're hearing things as well.
Mm-hmm. Aryn, do you want to start?
Yeah, so I'll just go through some of the basics for our listeners who can't see the physical chart. If you are watching on YouTube and also on Spotify too, you can see the videos as well if you want to take a look. But Emily's big three, as she mentioned earlier, are we got the Taurus sun at 4 degrees in the 4th house. We have a Leo rising at 2 degrees, and I also I don't know, I've never really connected that your Mars is conjunct your ascendant, even though you have Mars in Cancer at 28 degrees. It is conjunct the ascendant in Leo, which are separate signs, but that can happen when we have like planets or points at the end or beginning of the sign. So that's really interesting. I'm sure we'll talk about that. And then also that moon in Gemini in the 11th house, of course, like you so much emphasis on community, like that is like where you are nurtured, like that emotional deep sort of subconscious self is really drawn towards that. And then it's also conjunct the south node, which is interesting too. We can talk more about that. But in general, like I feel like a lot of your planets are pretty well spaced out through your chart. Like it kind of feels like there's a little sprinkle in each quadrant, or not like too much emphasis or like crowding of different planets. And I feel like you just have like a nice like mix of elemental energy too. Like you got like fire, of course, with that Mercury and Venus and Aries, and then of course the Leo rising. But then you have like a Mars in Cancer, so you got like that watery vibe, and you have the Gemini sort of butterfly flitting here and there, but then also the Taurus like fixed Earth energy too. So there's a lot of I would say like dynamic is like a word that I think, and that really like fits who you are and all the different things that you've been interested in.
I also just think like all the connections are so beautiful. Like if you look at rulership, so I'm going to start with your rising sign because your rising sign in Leo is ruled by a 10th house sun in Taurus. So you have this Leo energy of being shiny leadership roles, as Aryn mentioned earlier. And then in your 10th house, like ruled by this sun in the 10th house, which is visible and is a leader and, you know, is out there doing the work in the world, the work that you do in the world. And especially being in an earth sign, being in Taurus, like working with the earth, working with the beauty of the earth, you know, and your work just being very where you kind of light up and shine. Um, and then also that being related to your first house, your a rising sign of like self, you know, and Leo needing to be self-centered and like shining from the self, you know, is even more emphasized. And then you have that sun in Taurus ruled by Venus in Aries, which is so interesting too, you know. So you have this earthy sun in Taurus in your 10th house, very visible for Taurus energy, ruling over a fire sign. And then you have a fire sign Venus ruling over that earth energy. So I just think the relationships are really interesting. You can see it too in the Mercury in Aries ruling over moon in Gemini, right? And so you have like this fiery Mercury, you know, and you are such a Mercury in Aries, like just saying the thing, doing the thing, moving forward. Like that's one of my favorite things about you. And then you and your midheaven is also there too. You have like a ninth house midheaven in this. So it's, you know, more to do with like who you are in the world in your public life. And then you have this moon in Gemini being ruled by this fiery Mercury in Aries. And that's, like Aryn said, in your 11th house of community, and moon being your emotional energy, your belonging. And that moon is also ruling over this Mars in Cancer, you know, and you have this Mars in Cancer, uh like you know, the warrior for belonging, the warrior for nurturance. And that Mars rules over all the stuff in Aries. So it kind of like all comes back around in a way that's so beautiful, I think. Because you are somebody who is a leader, is somebody who says and does the thing. Like this podcast is very much fueled by Emily being like, let's move this forward, you know, very
Yeah.
Aries energy, very Leo energy, very like taking leadership. But you also do have that Taurus like patience, you know, like it's a really beautiful balance of being fiery and like quick, but also very patient and very grounded. And then obviously the Gemini moon in the 11th house is just one of my favorite things about you as well, because it's so um like curious. You have all these interests, you know. But Gemini, one of the magic things about Gemini is that all the interests do actually connect to one another. And there's like a magic that kind of comes out of your, you know, like right before this call, what did you tell us you were going to do? You have a whole nother project that you're like starting up already, you know. And that's just how you kind of have always functioned, is like these like little things coming together to kind of create this magical like whole picture, that I just think is really beautiful.
Yeah. Also, Moon in Gemini, trining Jupiter and Libra in the third house. So like the communication orientedness that you have, like you're a writer, like you're a yapper, like you want to connect through words and language. And also too, I was thinking, Danny, when you were talking about the ninth house midheaven, which is an interesting thing that can happen in whole sign house, where typically the midheaven is associated with the 10th house, but when it's divided in this house system, it can show up in actually different houses, which to me just adds more flavor in depth to how we can like interpret that. But I was thinking, okay, so midheaven in Aries ruled by Mars in Cancer, which is in your 12th house. So like, I don't know, there's like two threads that I'm thinking about. One of the threads is that of course you would have burnout in like heavy caretaking, nurturing kind of like roles. And we've talked about this too. So I'm like taking sort of our conversations where we've both kind of been in those roles, and it's not, it's fulfilling, but it's not like soul nourishing. It's really easy for, I think, that to be sort of drained. And I think part of what I'm noticing in your chart is like that life force and that energy is so important. And so when you get in these situations, especially related to like being of service to the community, I think it's easy for people who have such fire and like intensity to be like, I don't know. And also Mars in Cancer is a challenging placement to have as well. And I think part of the challenge is, how do I reckon with this energy and this intensity and this emotionality that I have? And then it's in the 12th house. So there's that layer of like, you need, I think any 12th house planet needs time to decompress and time to like have space, and like isolation or solitude is like really important, especially regenerating energy. And then, but it makes sense that like this, when you're finding a lot of energy when you're in these more spiritual roles, like how astrology was such a gift to you because it added, yeah, in the ninth house, 12th house connection of just like these things that you're learning about when they're spiritual, like there's something that's sustaining. Maybe that's the word I'm looking for. And I feel like having so like Mars is such a big signature in your chart. So I think everything you talked about of being on this journey of figuring out like what lights me up and what can I sustain realistically for my body, is just really striking to me.
Also, it's conjunct your, or it's approaching a conjunction. It's not quite there, but it's approaching a conjunction with your rising sign. And so your comments about how that was your identity, like
Mhm.
that was who you like were, like that Mars in Cancer signature is for sure a piece of your identity. And maybe because it's approaching, it hasn't quite made it there yet. There's a feeling of like, of moving towards that, and of learning how to embrace that. And, having your identity be Leo, like the Leo rising, like there, and Mars in Cancer is like, so like belonging and nurturing and, kind of other people focused. And Leo comes in and is like, but I need to be self shining. I need to be self sustaining. I need to be like my vitality comes from like me. You know what I'm saying? So that balance, it makes sense that you're kind of consistently seeking that balance. And as Aryn said, like with the ninth house connection too, with your midheaven being in your ninth house of like your spirituality and longer term plans and stuff like that, like it makes sense that spirituality and ancestor reverence and all of that stuff have kind of come in as like ways for you to kind of reckon with that reality of you both being this Mars in Cancer, nurturing person, moon in the 11th, community, belonging, being really important to you, and also needing to be really honoring of your own life force and your own vitality and your own, expression. And integrating those two is really beautiful. Like that's a really beautiful, journey. You talked about how hard it was earlier. And of course it's hard. I mean, again, Mars and Cancer, not a great placement sometimes, and also I don't want to say that. I think it's a beautiful placement, honestly. It's just can be challenging. And you talked a little bit about that, but on the other side of it, you're looking at it as like, oh, I spiritually grew into myself and I evolved my whole line, my whole lineage, which also is interesting with the 12th house connection to, with, connection to lineage and connection to spiritual lineage and stuff like that. Um, so yeah, I think it's like, it makes sense that you're kind of evolving into the spiritual herbalist way, as a way of like integrating these things about you.
Yay, I feel so seen. I wanted to point out I've been doing some like this like Mars in Cancer and my Venus in Aries, right? Like which is ruled by my Mars in Cancer. Like those two planets, and it's Venus and Mars, right? Like the lovers, the partners, they like those two planets, I think color my existence so powerfully. And in my chart, it was like Mars just rose over the eastern horizon, like as I came into this world. So it just touched the ascendant and is now, just coming up over the horizon. And as I've been doing my deep like ancestor work over the last couple of years, which I will say, to be very honest, like a big part of my ancestor work is like lineage healing work, to work to heal the woundings and the traumas, not just of my own individual existence, but like of my entire like lineage. And not that I can do every single lineage, but by me also healing from my own traumas. And one of my most prevalent, I will say, like, I like to use the word ancestral curse because, but to take it in a way that it's like these ancestral curses are rooted in epigenetics, which would be the more scientific language, but alcoholism, that is an ancestral curse for me. My paternal grandfather was an alcoholic. His father was an alcoholic. Even my grandpa Rupert, my beloved grandpa Rupert, was an alcoholic. So I have it on both sides of my lineage. And I am a recovering alcoholic. And it's only been like I've been sober for like 2 years, 3 months now, almost like 2 years in a season. And just this year, after 2 years of sobriety, I was like, yep, I'm an alcoholic. Like I can like finally admit that to myself. But if I want, what I want to point out is we talked about Pluto and Scorpio, and we talked a lot about that Pluto and Scorpio generation and us being the ones that are like literally doing this like emotional, psychological, like literally physically healing these wounds that have been passed on to us through our bodies and through our DNA and through our ancestors' emotional pains and struggles. My Mars in Cancer, one, rules my Pluto and Scorpio, is in a direct trine to Pluto and Scorpio in the fourth house, which is home and foundation and lineage. And my Pluto and Scorpio is in a direct square to my Saturn in Aquarius. So, kind of how I've been picturing, if like Pluto is like the evolutionary force in our chart, both of my malefics are in direct aspect to Pluto. And it's like my malefics, which the malefics speak to like the aspects of life where we suffer. And my Mars in Cancer, one was like suffering through being a child of divorce and the separation of family and that loss of a sense of belonging, and a tumultuous early childhood, moving around a lot, being very confused about why my parents were separating when I was like 4 years old. And then as I got older, turning to alcohol and drugs to cope, and like being a raging alcoholic for many years, and also turning to like drugs that helped me escape as well. And it almost feels like this evolutionary force. I would also think of my Pluto and Scorpio as really speaking to some of my like the struggles of my ancestral lineage that have been passed on to me. It's like Pluto is directing these malefics to like just those had their actions in my life. And before my Saturn return and during my Saturn return, it really was a lot of suffering. And now that I've been doing this deep, profound healing work, it's like I'm overcoming these struggles, and it's like I'm on the other side of it. But it's like I've had to like completely go deep into these depths of Pluto and Scorpio to like get to that point.
Well, and there's a trine too, like the trine relationship between Mars and Pluto, the malefics, which I don't always love that framing of it. I'm going to be totally honest, because I don't see Mars and Pluto as malefic, like I just don't see it like that. And I understand that's like an ancient astrology thing, but more to say on that some other day. Alice Sparkly Cat talks a little bit about this and talks about connection to like Roman authoritarianism. So I'm just going on a tangent here. But I think that trine is interesting because it shows up in a way that can be, it's still challenging, like if we want to think of malefic as like challenging, that makes sense to me, like it's still challenging, but it's like helpful in a way. You know what I mean? Like it's like that's Pluto is the ruler of Scorpio in modern astrology. Mars is the ruler of Scorpio in traditional astrology. So the two together to me make this very beautiful Scorpio energy, which has to be very real about like trauma and, all of that kind of stuff. and also has such a capacity to hold and transform. At the base of your chart, you said a long time ago, I have a lot of capacity to hold hard things, right? That you said that earlier. That Pluto in Scorpio, that's like in the base of your chart. That's like wells of like capacity to hold truth and hard things, and also a place of deep transformation, and also via your lineages, via your ancestors, via your spiritual lineages. So I don't know, I just think you are a really good example of like how Pluto and Mars can work together, in my opinion, not to make it easy for anyone, but to be able to really make change and transform and shift things in ways that are good for you and for your entire lineage.
It's like there's beauty in the struggle, and I don't want to like glamorize or like put rose-colored glasses through like my like struggles and trauma, but like if it wasn't for my struggles, if it wasn't for this like ancestral wounding that was handed down for me to do some like pretty serious healing work around, like I wouldn't be where I am today. And I'm like so grateful that I like these struggles like shaped me and gave me the perspective that I have today, because I think it's what allows me to be like to have such deep wells of empathy and compassion and grace for any struggle that anyone is facing.
Is there anything else that anybody wants to say about Emily's chart? I have a million more things to say, but I think that's it for right now for me. Emily, is there anything else that you'd like to share? Or any final messages you'd like to leave for our listeners?
Um, I think just that my journey has been very winding. And at times it felt like I was picking things up and then almost giving up and like setting them down. But at times when I had to set them down and compost them, it felt like that I was just like giving up and that I was failing at something. And it really took me to honor that one, linear time is a fallacy. That is like a colonial construct. When you get to be in relationship with astrology and the planets and the earth, you understand and you learn that time is cyclical, and that anytime you compost something or that you like give something up, that like I almost want to say what Rox said during her interview, like we got to make death fertile again. That composting things, letting go of things, shedding, that is literally creating the nutrients to create the fertile soil for your next chapter to be born. And then you've picked up so many skills, you've learned new things, you've had all these relationships. They will come back, right? Like they will all thread together. And so I just want to like honor the spiral of the journey, and that being really in the spiral is a beautiful thing. And it can be hard and frustrating, but it is also beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely. Emily, where can our listeners connect to you if they want to learn more about your work?
Yes. My newsletter is my main source where people can connect with me. I love to write. I write a lot about cycles. I write a lot about, I'm very vulnerable in my newsletter. I have that Leo rising, Aries midheaven. I write my truth in that newsletter. So flowermoon.substack.com if you want musings about cycles and astrology and plants. And of course, support this podcast. This co-creation is probably my favorite creation that I've ever been a part of. So just keep listening to our beautiful podcast and share it with your friends, and send it on to someone you think who would enjoy listening to this.
Absolutely. And we will include all of Emily's links in the show notes that you can check out as well. But thank you so much, Emily, for your vulnerability and allowing us to hear more about your journey. It's very inspiring. And interviews always give me a lot to think about. So thank you for everything. And thank you, Dani, for facilitating this with me.
I love you both.
Thank you, friends. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Soul Connections. To support the show, please share this episode with a friend and give us a 5-star review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts.
This podcast is an act of community co-creation with artwork designed by Bree Legan and original music written, produced, and performed by Sophia Mock, Queen Bonobo, Liv LaFlove, and Danielle Renee.
To connect with us or our guest, visit the links in the show notes. Until next time.